Now a couple of months ago, we brought a bunch of hatchbacks and sub 4 meter sedans to the track. And we got a lot of good feedback for that video. So it's good to see that you value the performance of your everyday machines. What we have for you today are these 4 petrol powered sedans. That's a 1.2 TSI, the only forced induction motor of the lot. That's a 1.4, a 1.5 and a 1.6. So let's get them on the track and see what happens. So, we're now heading out of the pit lane in the Maruti Ciaz. This of course is the petrol, it's the 1.4 which produces about 90 horsepower. To be honest, the engine is more tuned for efficiency rather than out and out horsepower, but it's a bit of a shame because it's a really nice chassis. I really enjoyed the car when I first drove it when it was launched last year, and it could do with a little bit more power, but it's quite light, so it's still pretty sprightly. And you know that the engines from Suzuki love to rev. They love to reach the red band of the RPM gauge. We're heading onto the front straight and we're going to start a lap in the Maruti Ciaz. So you have to be a little bit cleaner in the Ciaz. It prefers it if you're less of a hooligan, especially mid-corner. If you just give the car a little bit of leeway and you point the car, it goes exactly where you want it. Again, the basics of this chassis are brilliant. It's a little under-tired and it's a little under-engined, at least for purposes of this test. Body control is very good. It doesn't have a lot of body roll. Right, so we're now in the Honda City, and I have to say that this one feels like the most cockpit of the bunch. The cabin sort of encloses the driver, you sit low in the car, and it feels like a really nice place to be. The only gripe that I have, both with this one and the Ciaz, is that the steering column only adjusts for height and not for reach. So you never really find that perfect driving position. And you have to give credit to the engineers at Volkswagen and at Hyundai who have prioritized the fact that the steering column is adjustable for reach and rig, because I think that should be mandatory on all these cars. It's got a very predictable chassis, a very direct steering wheel, and it's actually quite a lot of fun to drive. These cars are fighting it out for that last 0.1% of fuel efficiency on the road, because it's so important to most of the buyers who are going to commute in this car on a regular basis, especially these petrol engine cars, because petrol is going to cost you at the pump. There's a reason that Honda makes such great high-performance cars, because that DNA is hidden in here somewhere. It's buried in the bowels of this chassis. It's just, in its current form, not particularly easy to extract because it's built for the commute and it's built to give you good mileage rather than performance. We're now in the brand new Volkswagen Vento. And I can tell you that the quality of the materials in this cabin are definitely the highest of the bunch. And I absolutely love this brand new flat bottom steering wheel. They've of course given this a recent facelift. They've given it a chrome slatted grille like the Jetta has. And it certainly looks better. It certainly no longer looks like it's a close relative of the Polo, which of course is the car that it's based on. This is also the only car with a DSG gearbox. So it's an automatic gearbox instead of dual clutch. It's a 7-speed, and what I found with this gearbox around the track is just put it in S and let the gearbox sort things out for you. Because the minute you try and put it in manual mode and shift for yourself, the computers don't like it very much. So a lot of the times they don't even listen to you. The car will, coming out of a corner, sense wheel spin and upshift anyway, even if you're not particularly inclined to do so and you want to go all the way to the red line. Today, however, I found a traction control off button on the center console, which I have depressed, so it says traction control is turned off. Hopefully that'll give me decent drive. Of course, this being a German car, the electronics don't go off completely, so even though the button says off and the car has been kind enough to tell me that it's turning it off, it's not actually fully off. So when you're going through a tight corner and the car is struggling for grip, it kind of catches at the brakes here and there, but it keeps you nicely in line. So I have no real cause to complain. There you go, a little harder on the brakes, and then it responds nicely indeed. There again, the gear shift, the gearbox upshifted on its own when it sensed a little bit of wheel spin. I would rather it had stayed in second and given me more drive coming out of that corner rather than going into third, but car knows best. It's a 1.2 TSI, it's a fantastic engine, the only turbocharged engine of the lot, and it produces about 104 horsepower. This of course is the same engine that does duty in the Polo TSI, and well, it does pretty well in the Polo TSI. So certainly this is the most clinical of the bunch. It's not sort of wayward, it's not flying from corner to corner, it's surgically sort of precise. But I just feel like the electronics are just interfering a little bit more than I would like, especially since I've only got 104 horsepower to play with, so I really don't want an electronic barrier between myself and the 104 horses. I was fortunate enough last year to drive the Polo R WRC car, which was an absolute dream come true. And that car is just unbelievably magnificent. I'm not sure I can even come up with adjectives to describe the levels of performance in that machine. It's pretty incredible. So it's nice to know that the overall structure is pretty much the same. Honestly, for the track now, I would have preferred a manual gearbox, but for everyday use in the city, with the level of traffic that we have these days, the DSG is an absolute blessing. Which is exactly what I was thinking as I was driving this car here to the track and I was sitting in traffic. The other blessing is the fact that these engines are so silent when you're driving in traffic that you're used to hearing that diesel clatter, and these engines are just beautifully silent. So we've just head out on track in the fastest car here. It's got a 1.6 litre 4-cylinder engine that produces 121 horsepower. And the last time we brought the Vento, the Honda City, the Verna, it was this car that was the quickest by an absolute whisker. It was 0.2 of a second. And it's got a nice urgent response coming out of the corners. It's got a really smooth drive line. It just sings all the way to the red line. The only trouble this car had, from what I remember, is that under hard braking, the rear end would tend to get a little bit loose. So let's see if Hyundai has, with this facelift, worked on the dynamics a little bit, because they're just taking such massive leaps with all the cars that they're developing anew these days. And each new generation car is almost literally, I mean dynamically at least, it feels like it's 2 generations up from whatever the car that it's replacing. They're just making huge strides when it comes to steering, when it comes to braking, when it comes to handling, when it comes to stability. And you know, on the road, these cars feel actually really good. It's just when you bring them out on track and you really put pedal to the metal, you run them at the ragged edge, then you get a little bit of sort of detailed feedback as to just what the chassis is capable of. So it feels very stable. It actually feels really comfortable even at speed. There is of course quite a bit of body roll, but it's all actually really well controlled. It's got a really smooth gear shift. It's got short throws. It revs all the way to 6,500 RPM. and we're approaching the final corner, getting ready to hit the front straight and start a time lap in the Hyundai Verna. Manage the wheel spin coming out of the last corner, get a little bit on the AstroTurf, up to 6,500 RPM, foot flat to the floor, heading down the front straight, coming up to 160 kilometers an hour on the back straight, just exceeding 160, approaching 170, and we're on the brakes for C4. Getting a little squirrely on the brakes, but not too much. Nicely hit the apex and flat on the power. You know, you get so used to driving diesel engine cars these days that it's really refreshing to get into a petrol engine car, a regular car like the Verna. As always, we have to keep in mind that none of these cars are built for the racetrack. We simply put them in an extreme environment to lay their performance bare. And it has to be said that they all perform quite well in their own way. Sure, the DSG of the Vento isn't as obedient as you want it to be on the track, but it's a godsend on the road, where it responds absolutely instantly. And the city may not be the quickest in this test, but it's quite a lot of fun nonetheless. And of course, the Ciaz could use more power at the track, but that's true for all the cars here, other than perhaps the Verna, which was quickest. The real takeaway for me was the joy of extracting every inch of performance with these petrol motors. Sure, modern diesels are incredibly refined and punchy, but there's nothing quite like revving a smooth petrol motor past 6,000 RPM. And of course, they sound a hell of a lot better at regular speeds as well as at the limit. So I, for one, am quite happy to see a bit of a petrol-powered resurgence taking place, and to that extent, none of these motors disappoint.